This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 15 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. We are now, in most leagues at least, into Week 2 of your fantasy playoffs. Hopefully you guys have advanced. If not, you've suffered the loss of defeat. And there's really no consoling because so much fantasy football is all luck. I mean, if all you Melvin Gordon owners out there, hopefully you didn't fall into his trap. But, you know, I got through in my fantasy league to the second round. I was able to pound my parents, which it felt good. I pretty much doubled them up. And, you know, even though they are beginner players, they did a really good job this year. They scoured the waiver wire, but I was able to hammer home, get the victory. And I got to say, it would have stunk if I would have lost to my parents, who are first-time players, because obviously I'm the fantasy expert here. But regardless, I'm going to help you try to get into your fantasy championship, because that's what next week is. If you're a crazy league where you go until week 17, I will restate that again. You guys are crazy, because that's when teams rest players. I mean, what if you got a Ezekiel Elliott and the Cowboys pretty much have first place locked up? They're not gonna play Elliott for that entire game. They still have Alfred Morris and they have Darren McFadden. So this is the week to get in to make your fantasy championship, and I'm gonna try and help you get there. And let's start looking at the matchups this week. I'm gonna start out again. I've been starting out with my home team because they always play at 1:00, and I love talking about them. The Detroit Lions travel to East Rutherford, New Jersey, to take on the New York Giants, the G-Men. And I think this is going to be a really good game. And there's a lot of players with fantasy implications. Starting with the Lions, Matthew Stafford, been having an MVP-like year. And you saw in the game last week, he hurt his middle finger on his throwing hand, which it's got to be a little concerning. And I'm not sure if you're really going to know the extent of the injury until we actually see it on Sunday morning, because I mean we can go by what the coaches say, but it's really going to take game time in seeing what he can do on the field, because it's still unsure if he's going to wear a glove, a half glove, no glove, or are they just going to tape his finger up. So it's really we only saw a little bit of it last Sunday. You saw he had the one interception that really wasn't his fault. It bounced off his receiver's helmet and bounced. It was basically a tip drill, and he got an interception. The other one was a little bit more concerning. That's the type of pass you don't want to see Matthew Stafford throw. The pass where it was a little rushed. He didn't really need to make that throw, and it was obviously not where he wanted to throw it. He was probably trying to lead his receiver, and he ended up really just throwing it right at and a little bit behind him, and it turned into a pick six. So what kind of Matthew Stafford are we going to get on Sunday? I tend to think we're going to be closer to the better Matt Stafford than a worse Matt Stafford, and that's just my gut feeling. I would still start him in fantasy leagues, and I think this is going to be a very important game. It could be a 28-35 game either way. It could go either way, really. So I think Matthew Stafford is a good start. Another concern about the Lions' offense is Theo Riddick. Right now, it's looking like he's doubtful and that he's not going to play again. And as we saw last week, it completely changes up the offense, because with Riddick in the game, you have a pass-catching threat out of the backfield, and he gets probably the most targets out of anybody on the team in a game, because that's your run game. They can't run the ball up the middle, so they have all these short passes to the running back, which essentially is a short run. So, and you saw Zach Zenner, Dwayne Washington, Joique Bell, they weren't able to do what Theo Riddick can do. So if they keep switching up their offense, Theo Riddick is a big proponent in PPR leagues. So be careful, watch out for him. You're going to probably have to check Sunday morning, see if he's going to play or not. And even if he does play, I'd be very cautious if he's actually going to play a full slate of snaps. The other running backs on the team, I wouldn't suggest playing them this week in essentially the fantasy semifinals. But the wide receivers, I would say that you can play these guys with hope that they're actually going to produce for you. Golden Tate has been playing. He plays like a wide receiver 1 at times, but I think his place and his niche, he's a really strong wide receiver 2. And then you had the other 2 wide receivers. Marvin Jones, you saw with no Theo Riddick, he was actually involved in the game more. And if he can actually complete some of those long bombs, Marvin Jones could help you. I think he's more of a flex player, and I think he's a really strong flex player. And also the other wide receiver, Anquan Boldin, he's a PPR monster. If you are in a PPR league, I think he's a strong flex candidate. Unless you have somebody else, I think Matt Stafford is pretty much always looking for Anquan Boldin. But I would stress a little bit of concern with Boldin because, as you saw with that pick 6 last week, is Boldin runs a lot of crossing routes, a lot of quick routes that Stafford, he needs to be pinpoint accurate on. And if he doesn't have that, that could really affect Boldin too, along with Stafford himself. On the other side of the ball with the New York Giants, I think Eli Manning, he's right around the top 10. And I think if he's your starting quarterback, I think you feel okay playing him today. But if you have somebody better, you probably put him in over Eli Manning, because I think this is going to be, both teams have something to play for. And Eli Manning, he's played in big games, he's succeeded in big games, but he's also been around long enough where he's stunk it up in big games. So I don't feel too confident starting Manning in this week. The running backs, Rashad Jennings, he's a pretty solid running back too, but again, I'm not expecting a ton out of him. The wide receivers, Odell Beckham Jr., I think you pretty much have to start him. You drafted him in the first round, and you've rid him and went through his ups and downs this season. If you were to bench him at this point, you either have a wealth of wide receivers on your team, or you might be clinically insane. So OBJ, you're starting him. Sterling Shepard, I think he's a risk player. He's the type of guy, if you're looking for some high upside, Sterling Shepard could be that guy, because I can see a scenario where the Lions try to take away OBJ from this game, and then Eli Manning is going to look to Sterling Shepard. But there's also the possibility that Odell Beckham is going to be completely fine and going to be able to do whatever he wants, and then that's really going to hurt Sterling Shepard's performance. So he's a very risky player. I think if you're going to put him in, you put him in at the flex. And really, that's everybody that I'd want on the Giants to play. Next matchup I got for you is another NFC North game. You get the Green Bay Packers going to Chicago to take on the Bears, a big rivalry game, and a game that has a ton of NFL implications. If the Packers really need to win out if they want to have any hope of getting in the playoffs or competing for the NFC North title. They're going to be competing with the Lions. So Aaron Rodgers dealing with a calf injury. He's probably going to be a game-time decision, but I would be completely shocked if Aaron Rodgers didn't play in this game, because the dude is known for he's being a beast, and he's going to play through this. He's finally playing at a high level again. So this is going to be a big game, and if he does play and the Packers are able to give him some protection, this could be a pretty big game for Aaron Rodgers. So I think you start him. He's going to perform pretty well for you this week. I don't like really any of those Green Bay running backs, because you can't pinpoint who exactly is going to get the ball, or if they're even going to get enough points to help you out fantasy-wise. Unless you have to, I would probably leave him on the bench. The James Starks, the Ty Montgomerys, if Ty Montgomery, he could have a bad day, and James Starks has an okay day, but neither of them are going to get you enough points to really help you fantasy-wise. The wide receivers, though, are, even though Aaron Rodgers is playing at a high level again, it's a mystery of who's going to perform. Jordy Nelson is probably the most consistent. He's going to give you the most consistent points week in, week out. So I think you can play him confidently. But the other guys, Randall Cobb and Devontae Adams, I think Randall Cobb really depends on those long plays. And getting a touchdown to get you fantasy points. So I would, if you had to start him, I would probably go Devontae Adams in the flex, just because it seems like he's getting more targets, and that slot position in the Green Bay offense always seems to perform pretty well. You saw James Jones pretty much come off of the street last year, and he was able to perform pretty at a high level. So on the other side with the Chicago Bears, don't really like Matt Barkley. He's not going to do much for you. He had a decent game against the Lions last week, but it's just not. You're not going to start him. He shouldn't even be owned in any leagues unless you're in a 2-quarterback league, and even then, probably shouldn't even own Matt Barkley. But Jordan Howard, he's been pretty solid, and I think if you have a high point in this game, it's going to be Jordan Howard. He could get one of those goal line touchdowns. You saw him; he was able to pick up some yards against the Detroit Lions the week before. And another bright spot with the Bears is Alshon Jeffrey coming off of his 4-game suspension. It's yet to be seen if the Bears are going to play him, but I can't imagine why they wouldn't want to play him. So if you want to have one upside, Alshon Jeffrey could be one of those guys who you plug in maybe at the flex if you're already solid, and then put in Alshon Jeffrey. He could put up a big day and actually win a fantasy game for you this week. Next matchup I got for you, I have the Tennessee Titans taking on the Kansas City Chiefs, and this is going to be a game that's really decided on the ground. You have two teams that they don't really pass the ball a ton. The Titans with Marcus Mariota, they have gotten a bit better. He's gotten a little bit more comfortable, but I see this game is just going to come down to who's going to run the ball more, who has more rushing yards. And so starting with the Tennessee Titans, you got DeMarco Murray, you got Derrick Henry. I think DeMarco Murray is going to be a very good start this week. Even though the Chiefs have a pretty solid defense, I think he probably gets around 80 to 100 yards, and he's going to be their source of offense. He's going to get at least a touchdown. Derrick Henry, I think if you're looking for, he's a risk play, but I don't see him having that high of a ceiling. So I'd probably leave him on your bench this week. He might get a touchdown, but he probably is not going to get too many touches and too many yards in this game. Marcus Mariota, even though he's performed admirably, I don't like him this game. The Kansas City Chiefs are playing at a high level, and I can't see the Titans really being able to just move the ball up and down the field through the air. So if you can, I'd leave Mariota on your bench this week. And I mean, Delaney Walker, even he's a top 10 tight end. He'll get you probably have to start him. You got no other tight end on your bench if you got Delaney Walker. So start him. He should get you enough points to at least tie your opponent in tight end. On the other side of the ball with the Kansas City Chiefs, it's really almost a similar story. With Alex Smith, he's not as good as Marcus Mariota, but he's a game manager. He's not going to make too many mistakes, and that spells a very bad fantasy quarterback. So you're not starting Alex Smith this week. Spencer Ware, I think he, again, kind of like DeMarco Murray, I think you give him 80 to 100 yards and maybe a touchdown, and he should be a decent start. I think he's at least a running back 2 in this game. None of the wide receivers I like on the Kansas City Chiefs. But again, like the tight end, they got Travis Kelce, who I think in some leagues is the top scoring tight end in some leagues. So you put in Travis Kelce and hope for the best. Maybe he picks up a long gainer. Maybe he gets one of those touchdowns. And that's really all I can say about Titans Chiefs. They're just not that fun offensive-wise. So the next matchup I have the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Minnesota Vikings. 2 more teams who are really fighting to stay in the playoffs. So with the Colts, I think it's going to be a tough matchup for Andrew Luck. And if they really want to fight to get into the playoffs, they're going to have to win this game. I wouldn't be upset because I'm rooting for the Lions, and I need the Vikings to lose. So I think Andrew Luck, he's going to have more of an average day because the Vikings, they've gotten off of their losing ways a little bit. So Andrew Luck, probably not going to have a huge day, but I think he's still going to be sustainable. And, you probably don't have another quarterback on your team who's going to do better than Andrew Luck unless you have a Matt Ryan or just have a girth of quarterbacks on your team. So Andrew Luck should be okay for this week. I'm just not predicting a breakout week for him. Frank Gore, again, he performs like a running back too. He's not going to wow you with his stats, but he's going to put up consistent numbers. So, I mean, unless you have somebody who you think is going to be head and shoulders above, better than him, then you're probably going to start Frank Gore. And then T.Y. Hilton, another guy who he just always seems to perform well. And Andrew Luck loves him. So I think T.Y. Hilton, you pretty much have to start him. Not really a fan of anybody else on that team, especially the wide receivers. And the tight ends really are a mystery. They got Dwayne Allen and Jack Doyle. You're never sure who's going to be the guy who gets the bulk of those the bulk of those receptions, or the bulk of the red zone looks. So I don't really like them fantasy-wise to start. On the opposite side, with the Minnesota Vikings, probably the biggest news for them is that running back Adrian Peterson, who really only played the first and second game maybe, he's actually looking like he's coming back. So for any of those people, if you're like me, I drafted Adrian Peterson in the first round, and he essentially ruined my team because you have to have your first round pick perform. If he's out for the season, he pretty much ruins your roster because you have to somehow make up for his totals with something on the waiver wire or trying to make a blockbuster trade. So if you're a team that kept Adrian Peterson and you're still in the playoffs, or if you're one of those players who was seeing the signs that he's actually close to coming back and you picked him up, this is one of those games, and I think this is a high risk, high reward, play this game. You're not sure what he's going to give you. And I mean, logic would say that the Vikings are going to ease him back into this game. But I think if any running back can make it back within the season from what injury he had, we saw it before when he had his ACL injury. He came back 9 months and was the MVP. If anybody can do it, Adrian Peterson could do it. So I think this is a very high risk, high reward play. If you want to play it safe, I'd probably leave AP on your bench. That would be my advice. But if you're looking for a high ceiling player, I think Adrian Peterson is absolutely that guy, and he could be really good. And if he does play at a high level, then that's just good for the rest of the teams. Sam Bradford not going to be a starting fantasy quarterback, but that does spell good things for guys like Stephon Diggs and Kyle Rudolph, where if they're not because if AP is AP again, you can't just play zone coverage and make Sam Bradford beat you, because they're just going to hand the ball to Adrian Peterson all day long and they're going to tear you up. So it's going to be a completely different game, and I think it could really help guys like Stephon Diggs and a tight end Kyle Rudolph actually be a viable starting fantasy tight end. Next matchup I got for you is the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is just it's a huge AFC North matchup. Tons of playoff implications. Again, all these games have playoff implications. And, it's going to be a hard-fought game. And I definitely worry for the big three in Pittsburgh. Big Ben, I'm not sure how big of a game you can expect for him, because it's really going to depend on if they can move the ball. And I think the one guy who you can really depend on would be Le'Veon Bell. I think they're going to run the ball with him, and they're also going to pass the ball to him. So he's going to be their main source of offense. And if Antonio Brown can get open and they can get the ball to him, he's going to be good. You're not going to sit Antonio Brown in this game, but I do worry what is his production going to be this game. So again, and also with Big Ben, I'm not sure what he's going to give you. On the opposite side of the ball, with the Cincinnati Bengals, AJ Green looking like he's doubtful. I'd watch him on Sunday morning to see if he actually is going to play. And obviously, if he doesn't, you're going to take him out of your lineup. And a guy who I hate, but he's been performing at a high level, has been Jeremy Hill. I think you can pretty much put him in at running. He's just like Frank Gore. You put him in at running back too, and he's going to get you 60 to 70 yards, but he'll also get you a touchdown. So he'll get you what you need at running back too. Next matchup I got for you is the New Orleans Saints taking on the Arizona Cardinals, which this game probably looked really good at the beginning of the season, but now the Saints aren't looking too good. The Cardinals aren't looking too good. There's not really, of all the games we've listed so far, this is probably one of the first games that doesn't have playoff implications in the NFL. So with the Saints, I think Drew Brees, he'll probably be solid. He's going to give you 300 yards and a couple touchdowns. He might give you an interception here and there because the Cardinals do have a pretty decent defense, even though their record doesn't show it. But I think you're going to start him, and he's going to probably get you a playoff win here. But with Mark Ingram, I would be careful with him. He's been slowed down in these last couple games, and the Cardinals are a team that can really shut down running backs when they key in on those guys. So I wouldn't feel too comfortable starting Mark Ingram. If you have somebody else, I'd probably put him in over Mark Ingram. At wide receiver, Michael Thomas looking like he's questionable. I'd watch Sunday morning to see if he's playing. If he does play, I'd probably put him in at the flex. And Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, and Willie Snead, none of those guys really feel like wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 to me. I think all of them at this point in the season, they're all flex considerations because you're not getting consistent play out of any of them. So I'd be careful with all of those guys. On the opposite side of the ball with the Arizona Cardinals, Carson Palmer, who hasn't really been doing good all season, he's been projected to actually score the most points in this week. So, I mean, and it really has all to do with who he's playing, the New Orleans Saints, with their poor defense. So I would take that with a grain of salt, though, because I think teams get up to play each other. So Carson Palmer, he could have a better day. I just don't see him he's not going to be the best fantasy quarterback this week. So David Johnson, still going to be a good start, and he's going to really be, I think, who the Cardinals key in on to be their main source of offense. And the only fantasy wide receiver that I will still trust at all on the Arizona Cardinals is Larry Fitzgerald. If anybody's going to do it for them, Larry Fitzgerald is going to be the guy who gets some points. And I'd feel comfortable starting him this week in fantasy. Next matchup I got for you is the New England Patriots going to Denver, Mile High Stadium, to take on the Denver Broncos. And, Tom Brady, you pretty much have to start him every week. But I'm actually in my league where I'm going into the playoffs. I'm not starting Tom Brady this week. And, it's because of who I have. I have Matt Ryan, who I think Ryan playing the 49ers is going to have a better day than Tom Brady going up against the Denver Broncos. And I'll be okay if, obviously, if Matt Ryan just completely stinks it up, which I don't see going up against a bad 49ers team. But I can, if it's, Tom Brady scores a little bit more than Matt Ryan, I'm going to be okay because, I think I made the right choice because I think there was a greater chance that Brady doesn't have a big day this game. I think he's still going to be serviceable, but I definitely think he's going to have a more average day. I really see this as a game where they're going to rely on LeGarrette Blount. He's going to be a big part of the offense this game. They're going to try and wear down that Denver defense, and they're going to try and protect Tom Brady from all those pass rushers on the Denver Broncos. So I really like LeGarrette Blount, and I think James White, or this might be the Dion Lewis game where he finally comes back and has a big day. I think James White has kind of tapered off, but I could really see a guy like Dion Lewis finally come back and be productive. So I think in PPR leagues, if you're looking for a high-risk player, Dion Lewis may be at the flex. And really, the other guys, Julian Edelman's going to put up some points, but I don't think you can really risk any of those other Patriot players. On the opposite side of the ball with the Broncos, it's going to be a tough game for them as well. Trevor Siemian, not a fantasy starter. Devontae Booker, if you probably got him on your team, and he's probably helped you get to where you are. And it's a tough game. It's going to be a tough matchup. You're probably going to, you still play him this week, but I'm not sure what he's going to give you. And for Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, I think they'll both catch some balls. I'm not sure if they'll catch a touchdown or not, but I really just see average days for both of those players. Last matchup I got for you this week is the Sunday night football game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the top team in the NFC, the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I think, starting with the Buccaneers, Jameis Winston, I think he's been a borderline top 10 quarterback all year. And I think this is a game where really, the Bucs are fighting to try and get into the playoffs, and the Cowboys are really trying to stave off other teams and lock up that home field advantage. So maybe in Week 17, they don't have to start all of their players that they have. So it's going to be a tough game for both of these teams. Jameis Winston, I think he'll give you probably around 300 yards and a couple touchdowns, but just know he'll probably give you at least 1 or 2 interceptions. Doug Martin, he's going to be serviceable, but the Cowboys have been having a better defense. So if you have somebody better, I'd probably put him in over Doug Martin. And Mike Evans, you're going to start him, and he's going to be the main recipient of those targets from Jameis Winston. And hopefully he can get a touchdown on the Dallas Cowboys. And on the other side of the ball with the Dallas Cowboys, not a huge fan of Dak Prescott. And I know my brother, he's actually thinking about starting Dak Prescott this week over guys like Matt Stafford, Carson Palmer, and Marcus Mariota, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I can understand because Dak Prescott, while he's not a high reward player, he is a very low risk player. I don't see him really just completely tanking. He's going to give you a decent fantasy day if you put him in, but he's not going to win you. He's not going to be the reason that you win a fantasy playoff game here. But Ezekiel Elliott is a guy who can win you a fantasy playoff game. So I think you start him. He's going to have a solid day. He's been one of the best running backs this year. And not a huge fan of really any of the other Cowboys. Dez Bryant just hasn't been the Dez Bryant, the dominant Dez Bryant that we've seen in years past. So I'd be very cautious playing him. Jason Witten, same initials. I think he's a top 10 tight end, and he'll perform as such. He's not going to be a guy who's going to be the difference in your fantasy matchup. That's all the matchups I got for you, and that is pretty much it for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. Next week will be in championship week, and I will coach you through when we get to there. Hopefully you're all there and you're all still listening. But until next week, later, nerds.